Hello and welcome to the part 4 of the tutorial 16, which is actually the last part. And it is about documenting your research using NOMAD ELN functionality. So in this part, we will introduce a simple experimental procedure and we'll use NOMAD's ELN functionality to document this scientific process. So for this, we thought we use NOMAD's built-in ELN templates to document the research process by making several entries. And that's what you'll learn. And then at the next step, we'll reference these entries together, basically interconnect these ELN entries together and define workflows. And finally, we will see that how we can use Nomad's structured way of storing data to search and filter through these ELN entries that we create. And finally, we learn the basics of creating a custom ELN template. We inspect the custom ELN template in the graphical user interface of Nomad. And we'll use a tabular parser to process a raw CSV file and incorporate it into the custom ELN template that we write. So let's get started with the example use case that we have. Imagine that we have a polymer powder. In this case, it's P3HT, and we have a solvent. We want to weigh a few milligrams of this polymer powder using the scale, and then we want to mix it with some milliliters of the solvent that we collect. Excuse me. And make this sample, which is the polymer solution. And then we have also glass substrates. We clean it using the ultrasonic bath. And then we want to spin coat a thin layer of this polymer on top of this glass substrate. And finally, measure the optical absorption of this polymer thin film and get a graph like this. And to have it in our, we want to have it in our ELN. So Nomad has already some built-in templates to document the general information that we have for our experimental procedure. Let's go back here. So here we have different substances like polymer powder, solvent, and glass substrate is kind of a substance. And then we prepare samples like polymer solution is a sample that we prepared. And after we spin coat the glass substrate is another sample that we prepared. We also have instruments here that are listed here, and all of them can go in an overarching ELN entry, which is called experiment ELN. So they are the names of the different ELN built-in schemas that we have in Nomad. The names are quite intuitive. So substance for substances, instrument for instruments, and so on. And maybe it's interesting that we also have materials processing ELN, which actually tells what are the inputs, what are the steps that we treat the materials, or what are the output samples that we generate with this. So now let's go to Nomad. And let's start with creating entries. I just go under Publish, Uploads, create a new upload, give it a name. Save it, and then click Create from Schema. So let's start with some substance and start with chloroform, and then I choose built-in schema, which is already chosen. Then I remove it, and then if I click here, I see the ELN built-in schemas that we already have in Nomad. I can just choose substance ELN and click Create. So we see different quantities which are listed here. The name was already what we gave. The tag is something which is indexed later and makes our ELN searchable. That's why we can just put different tags here, for instance, for project A, for project B, for collaborator, or now let's call it, let's say, my substance. And After that, a new tag field opens that I just leave it for now, and I can just give some description here in this description field, which is a free text field about the substance that we have. So the date time is the time that we create. We can also change it, for instance, or if you are going to make this ELN entry later, we can just assign the correct date for it. And the substance ID is basically my affiliation, Humboldt University Berlin, my first name and last name initials, and the date of today, and the name of the substance. We can actually also change it if you want to. And yes, so the important thing is that we should always save using this diskette button here so that everything is saved. And I can just go to the overview tab and see that all my data that I actually gave for this entry is already saved. So now let's go to the upload. I can just create another entry for the powder that I have, and I stick with this built-in schema. I can even start writing here substance, and Nomad shows me the relevant one, which is substance ELN, and I click on create. Okay, so there was a mistake here. The T should be capital. I can immediately correct it here. And again, the same thing as we had for the chloroform. I just leave the rest of the fields empty. I save it. I can just have a quick look on the overview, and that's it. And now let's make an entry for our instruments. Let's call it, let's say, scale. Instrument here. It shows me the available option. I click create. So everything is here. I just call here my instrument. And again, if I want to give some description or want to fill some other fields, I can just continue. But perhaps the more interesting part comes next, which I want to create a materials processing ELN. So the polymer processing. So let's call it polymer solution preparation. And then I can just come here and I will see that there is a processing ELN. I can see it here. Let's search it. Material processing ELN. Then click on create. So the name is already given. Date is now. Let's say the tag is my process. And I can even tell the process, like I first weigh this amount of polymer, mix it with something, and so on. So I can even add steps here. For instance, let's call it polymer weighing. And I should always click on this diskette button to save. And then let's add another step. So this was just what we created. And the second step is, let's say, polymer mixing. I can have even more description if I want. So now I go to the instruments subsection. I click on this plus button here. So here I can refer or reference to an already existing entry, which was the scale. So I just click on this upload, and then that was the ELN instrument for the scale that we just created. Or I can directly create an instrument entry here. Let's say I used, let's say, ultrasonic cleaner for cleaning my vials before mixing the polymer, let's call it. And then, so for that, I just click on this plus button here. Let's say sunning bath and click on save. Okay, once I did this, I can go to the overview tab and already see that there is a workflow which is created for me. So basically, this is my workflow. I first weigh the polymer, then mix the polymer, but the inputs and the outputs are not yet clear. So I go back to the data tab. And yes, under here, I have samples. The sample that I create after these steps is basically the polymer solution. Okay, so I did not create a polymer solution sample yet. I can just directly create it here. So this is just telling that which upload, which means this currently this upload, and then it's telling me from which class or from which built-in template should I inherit, and I correctly stay with the ELN sample, and then I just call polymer solution, and then click on create and save. I go back to see my workflow graph. So the final sample is defined here. And now the inputs are now missing. If I want to add the inputs, I come back to the data tab. So here I just go to the workflow tool and then look for inputs, and I can just insert my inputs here. So since I already created the chloroform entry, I can just refer to it by having this pen button, only this upload. And then I search for ELN substance. So this is one of them. Choose it, click save. My second input was the polymer powder itself that I already have the entry, which was polymer powder, P3HD powder. And I save it. And then I can just go back to the overview tab, and I see that this materials processing ELN that I created has two inputs, which is ELN substance, and has one output, which was the polymer solution. And the procedure is also documented here. And I can see to which other entries does this ELN entry refer to. I can even click on these entries and go to the entry page. For instance, this is the polymer solution. I can add tag, let's say my sample, and even edit further if I want to add some more description and so on. So now let's click save. And now let's go back to the upload level. Let's go to uploads. That was the last upload that I just created with six entries. And I can now even search through these entries. I just need to come to this magnifier icon here and then click on all entries. So this is basically the upload ID that I have. So only the entries in this upload are being shown. And I come to this terms, search for tags, and then this is suggested by Nomad. I click on it, and now I can see that I made two entries with the tag my substance. Let's also add some other widget, which is a section. I just type section and I want to capture this. Okay, it's not that complete yet. So this is basically telling the information that I entered have been stored in which parts in which sections in Nomad. So if I now just want to see my substances, I can just click here and I will see that the entries that I see under this are just limited to the ones that are ELN subsets. All right. Now, it's just a test to see how we can manage once we have more files. I can download the tutorial files from the main page, which is this one. So it's important that I extract these files. I just put them in my desktop. So for, and I'm interested in this zip file because I want to upload it to Nomad. Just come and create a new entry. Say, call it organized research entries. And I simply drag and drop here. Take some time because it's a couple of entries. So I can see an overview of the files that I have uploaded here. As you can see, there are different folders or directories, and inside each of those, I have a couple of files. The ones that have this sign are the ones that are recognized by Nomad and are parsed and are actually entries in Nomad. However, I can also upload files that are not necessarily recognized, like a PDF file. For instance, this one is related to my research. I can even, so this is the overview of the files. I can even access the files in the Files tab here. For instance, this PDF, I can directly either download or have a preview here. And I can also access the other files, either download them or even upload extra files to these folders. Okay, now let's go and see how I can search through these different 28 entries that I have. Let's say after some research process, I just need to come here and then go into this, hover into this magnifier thing. I see all entries. Just remember that the upload ID is this one, and I'm going to see this again once I come here. I go to entries, and that's the upload ID, and that's the terms widget that I had. For instance, I had different solvents, I prepared different polymers, I had different substrates, and so on. And here are the 28 entries that I had. I can just search through them or filter them just by clicking here, and I only see the 7 different solvents that I had. Okay, let's get started. Again, I go to the tutorials page, and we are now in the one to the last part, which is creating custom ELN templates. So the first task is that we inspect the custom schema in Nomad visually. So I go to the publish, to the uploads, create a new upload. For it. And so this is a file that I just downloaded from the web page of the tutorial. And I simply drag and drop this file here. So the Nomad, understand, is a custom, it's a schema file, and process it, and we see the status here, which is successful. And then to create an entry, we just click on create from a schema, give it a descriptive name. And then choose here custom schema, and then click on this magnifier button. and only this upload. And this was the schema that we just uploaded. And this is the one. Okay. So again, there are 4 tabs here, and we are in the data tab, and we see a couple of quantities listed here. The name of the experiment, the name of the main section of the schema is experiment information, GPU, and this GPU is what I chose to tell it's something that user gives, and this stands for given by the user. So these quantities are name of the experiment, GPU, the researcher who performed the experiment, some date, and some additional notes for the experiment and so on. The interesting part are these subsections that I defined for this custom schema, which is sample GPU, solution GPU, and the preparation. And maybe again, this one is a bit more interesting because this is itself a subsection which contains 2 more nested subsections of solute and solvent. Anyway, so here we can just say that, for instance, I prepared a 10 milligram per milliliter polymer, and I can just define the unit here and give it a time, date and time stamp, and some short name and so on. And then these subsections can refer to the, for instance, the solute in our case was the polymer powder, the P3HT powder. I can either directly create it here or reference it to an existing entry, or same for the solvent, which was in our case the chloroform. Okay, we have inspected this custom ELN template visually in the NOMAD, and now let's go to the tutorials page and see what are the guidelines of making some custom ELN schema like this. So let's open an editor or an IDE, and this was the file that I just uploaded to NOMAD. So again, the important thing is that the file must have the extension .archive.yaml so that NOMAD understands its schema and parse the schema that we upload. So let's open it. Okay, so the first guideline is that NOMAD's custom schemas should have a definitions keyword, start with the definitions keyword, and they must have a name and can have a description. For instance, in this custom schema, we started with some definitions. It has a name, and this name is basically something that appears when I'm going to choose the schema from NOMAD graphical user interface. It doesn't have any description, which was optional. The second guideline is that a schema can have several sections. In this example that you see here, it has 3 main sections, but the example that we just uploaded and inspected has only 1 section. And again, this is a keyword. It must be sections, and it should be, the name of the section should be indented with respect to this sections keyword. And in this case, our main section is called experiment information and given by the user. So the third guideline is that sections inherit structure and definition from NOMAD's base sections or other sections. So basically, using this keyword base sections, I can tell which NOMAD's base section can be used or can be inherited to create this schema. And this is the main, or this is the, let's say, most primitive base section that allows something to be an entry in NOMAD. That's why I inherited from this. It's not necessary that we only inherit from only the base sections of NOMAD. We can inherit from whatever section that we create in NOMAD or someone else has created and is accessible for us in NOMAD. It's just important we know how to refer to this section and list it here. For this, you can refer to the documentation page and search for references. So the next guideline is that each section can contain quantities, other sections, and subsections. For instance, this main section has some quantities and has some subsections. And let's have a quick look at on the quantities. So it's the name GPU, researcher GPU, and date GPU, and additional notes GPU. So quantities can be defined with type, shape, unit, and other properties. Let's have a quick look on this name quantity that we defined. it has a type, which is string. Of course, it doesn't have any unit. That's why we don't define it. And we thought of some default value, default text for it, which was experiment title, if you remember it from the graphical user interface. And yes, it doesn't have a shape, like basically the shape is for numeric values. So, and the last guideline is that the section and quantities can have annotations. And annotations are basically key value pairs that instruct Nomad how to treat those sections or quantities. For instance, in this quantity, we can tell Nomad that first of all, it's an ELN quantity, and it's of type string edit quantity, which means that a piece of string which is editable by the user. We can also have annotations for the sections, for instance, to show this section in the overview section in the overview tab of the ELN, or other functionalities that can Nomad learn by telling these annotations. Okay. Now let's quickly see how does it look in Nomad again. For that, I go to the Nomad, create a new entry based on this schema. So create from schema, test2. There's 4 things here. So if you remember, this was a name that we just gave here in the name of the, under the definitions as a name of the custom schema. So this is basically the same thing that is here. And then let's choose it. And then the name of the section is shown here, experiment information GBU, which is what we defined here. And let's choose it here. And this is the way that Nomad references different sections. Okay, so they are, here we see the 4 quantities that we defined. So basically the name of the experiment, the name of the researcher who performed the experiment. And if you remember, we thought of some default value that is written here, some date, and some additional nodes are basically the 4 quantities that we defined for this custom ELN. And then there are these subsections that are listed under this subsection. And each subsection, after I have the subsections keyword here, I should name the subsection, and it should be followed by section keyword in singular form. So basically, I have the sample, solution, and preparation subsections. And if I go to the solution subsection again here, I see that it has 2 nested subsections itself. I just open it here, and then I can see that there is this subsections keyword and solute subsection and solvent subsection. And these are basically the fields and the other quantities that I have here. Okay, that was it for this part, which was using Nomad's built-in tabular parser. So it's very common that the output of the instrument is a CSV file or it's an Excel file. And as you saw before, we cannot directly upload this CSV file because Nomad doesn't recognize it and doesn't parse it automatically. So there's a way to have these files in Nomad as entries, and that's with using a built-in tabular parser, and the steps are actually written here. So there are basically 2 types of different parsers, tabular parsers. One is the column mode, which you have columns like this. And for instance, in this example, which is the optical absorbance of this polymer thin film, we have 2 columns with different values that are listed here. And the focus in this tutorial is the column mode. For the row mode, you can refer to the Nomad's documentation to see how we can work with those the other mode of the tabular parser. So we have a data file, which is a CSV, and let's inspect it visually again. So in the first row, we have the name of the quantities, basically wavelength and absorbance. The second row is something that we don't need, is the units given to these quantities in the CSV file. And then we have the list of the numbers or the values for these two different quantities. And in this case, in our example, the separator is comma. So Nomad's tabular parser is basically based on pandas, if you are familiar with, and it's basically just some syntax collected from pandas and incorporated into Nomad. Yeah, so now let's go through the steps and make a tabular parser. For that, I just come back here, create a new data file, call it live tabular parser, and that was important to call it .archive.yaml. And yeah, so the first step was to first start with some definitions keyword and give it a name and give it also some section name. So let's copy this part here. So quite important is that we should care about the indentations. We'll see later. So the next part was to adding the needed base sections. And this base section is basically whenever we want to have something as an entry in Nomad, we should use this base section, or this base section is already inherited in some other base sections that we inherit from. So let's keep it there for now. This base section teaches Nomad that basically tells Nomad that we are going to use a tabular parser, so that we should use this base section as well. And this is just for plotting. So let's copy it again. As I said, the indentation is important. Come to the beginning of the line. And let's close it. So this section, which is called optical absorption, has some base sections. That's why it should be indented one level with respect to the main section name. So the next part is defining the quantities for our custom schema. We thought of these three different quantities: a data file, a wavelength with small w, and an absorbance quantity with small w. And we thought of assigning some type to them. For instance, the data file is of type string, which is basically the path to that file. That's why we assign the type string to that data file. The wavelength quantity that we are going to store the values of the wavelength from that CSV file. So the values are floating point numbers. That's why we chose numpy.float64, and we define the unit already here. What I see in this file is given in nanometers. That's why I chose the unit already here. And the shape means that it's a one-dimensional array of arbitrary size. I don't know what is the length of this array. That's why I just chose this shape for that. Same for the absorbance. Again, just to remember that I am choosing this absorbance quantity with small a, because I want to make it distinguishable with this title of the column in the CSV file. And again, the same story for the absorbance quantity. Now let's copy it. Come here to the beginning of the line and then adjust the indentation. So our main section has some base sections and has some quantities. That's why the base sections and quantities should be in the same level. Step 4 is to instruct Nomad how to treat these different quantities. So for instance, for the data file, we know that we're going to upload the data file in an ELN interface. That's why we should teach Nomad that it's an ELN and the component is file edit quantity. And this is telling Nomad that you can just accept file from the browser, and also apply a tabular parser on it. And what is the parsing options? Basically just skip rows that start with a number sign, Actually, those lines are comments, just don't read them. And then we have these skip rows. Again, as I said, it's quite similar to the syntax of pandas. Once I have a list here, like in square brackets, and it's I, so the line which has this index will be skipped. In our case, if you remember, the second line was what we didn't need, which was the units, and I want to skip that. That's why I put 1 there. And if I put an integer there, let's say n, the first n line will be skipped. If I want to skip line 2, 3, 4, then I should put here 1, 2, and 3. So the mapping option tells the tabular parser that in which way it should parse the data or the values in that CSV file, which in our case is column mode, and the rest is just for reading the file and so on. So in order to tell how NOMAD should treat this data file, I should have this annotation, which is basically the combined 3 annotations that I had here. I just need to copy this, come under data file. I know it's of type string, but I should now tell NOMAD how to treat it. And I just, using the tab, bring it to the level of the type. So this data file has this type and should be treated like this. So the next one is the wavelength quantity. And I should tell NOMAD that treat this quantity and take the values from the tabular parser from the column which has the name wavelength with capital N. So it's important that this name is exactly equal to the header of the column that we're going to collect the values from. That's why I made it different. So basically, I called the quantity that I want to store the values wavelength with small w, and the header of the column is wavelength with capital W. So I come here, as I said, tell NOMAD how to treat this wavelength. So basically, the wavelength quantity is of type floating point number. As a unit nanometer that I define it myself here, not getting it from the file, and has a shape of one-dimensional array of arbitrary size, and it should be treated like this. The same for the absorbance quantity. So this quantity has a type, has a shape, and should be treated like this. Okay, now let's remove the unnecessary lines. And now I want to tell NOMAD that it should create a plot for me based on the quantities that I just defined. So basically, I call it, so it's called a plotty graph object. It's NOMAD syntax. And the data, the x-axis is the wavelength quantity that I just defined here, and y-axis should be the absorbance quantity that I just defined here in my schema. And the layout should be, actually, it's just giving a title to the graph that I'm going to create. So basically, I copy this. So I want this graph to be shown in the main section. That's why it should be at the same level of the first things that I defined for this main section. So this is my main section. My main section has some base sections, has some quantities. Let's fold them. And now I want that this plot to be shown on the main section. That's why it should come at the same level as data file. Oops, sorry. At the same level as base sections and quantities. So now you see they're in the same level. And there's a final step, which is optional. So imagine that I want to add some description for the data file that I'm uploading. For instance, like, what is this material? What does it come from? Like some description, some random description. And there is a list of editable quantities in the NOMAD development deployment currently. So this is the page that I can choose whatever I want from this set of quantities. I thought of having a free text field, which is this one. So I just come and copy this field. Here. And since I want to explain the data file, so I just define it as a new quantity. And let's put it at the same level of data file. Yes, and I can even rename it. Let's say, oops, info about data. And yeah, the rest is just similar as what I have here. And yes, that's all. So now let's save this with Control S. And now I go to Nomad, create a new upload. Let's say test live tabular parser. And okay, so now let's even change the name so that I can easily find it. Okay, it's fine. This is the file that I just created, live tabular parser.archive.yaml. And now I just drag and drop it here. So it's successfully parsed by Nomad. I just need to create from the schema, call it, let's say, entry test live tabular parser. That's the name of the entry. And then choose custom schema, and then click on this magnifier button, only this upload. And that was the same thing that I just had here. If you remember, the name is, this is a parser for optical absorption, which is this one. And let's create. Okay, that was what I thought to have. That was a field that I inserted at the last part, which was a free text field, info about the data. And now I have something that I have some field that I can upload my data file. And I see the empty quantities here already ready for me to read it from the file that I have. I come and click on this thing. And this is the example file that you can also, that you have already downloaded. P3HD optical. I click open and click on save. And I have this graph now. And I can see already that my wavelength quantity is filled with the quantities. The units here is now shown in angstroms, although I had it in nanometers. Even in this graph is in angstroms, but I can just come here and choose length and choose nanometers. And now everything is changed to nanometers, although originally the values are now stored in nanometers, but the display unit was angstroms. Perhaps it's also worth mentioning that if you remember from the beginning of the tutorial, you were able to upload CSV files to Nomad, but they were not recognized by Nomad. And now, with this method, with this way, we are able to read the values in the CSV file and map it, or actually have it in quantities. And once we do that, then we actually have those values as quantities as entries in Nomad. And now we are able to publish them in Nomad, or even publish and get a UI. For instance, if you have a couple of those and you want to write a paper based on those, we collect those, assign a tag or name as a data set, and then publish and get a UI and refer to the data set in our paper. Okay, so the next step is to see if we can integrate this tabular parser in the already existing polymer processing custom ELN template that we prepared. So we're actually in step 7. So So the last part of the step 6 was the um, tabular parser that we had. And here in step 7, we have the custom ELN that we prepared and even inspected in the graphical user interface. So I just need to copy this piece of YAML, open my editor, and then create a new file. Let's call it live polymer processing with tabular parser dot archive.yaml, and then I paste it and fold it. Okay, so there are different ways that there are different places that we can put this tabular parser. I thought of putting it as a separate subsection. So basically, this is our main section, which is the experiment information. And then it has some subsections that we saw before, sample, solution, and preparation. And I thought we can add this as a subsection with respect to that, to the main section. So this is the key word that we need to have. Actually, I need to expand my last subsection. I have this, and this subsection is actually at the same level of the other subsections, which is now correct in this case. So, and from here on, I just need to give the section definition of the optical absorption, which is here. So I have already this name. I need to start with the base sections because I've already told that that is a section. I just need to copy this part. And here indentation is important. So this is the part that I just copied, if you remember from base sections. From the beginning of the line I started, and now I need to bring it one level indented with respect to the sections so that I'm actually defining a section definition. And now I just save it, go to NOMAD, and let's remember. Okay, so now let's also change the name of the file, name of the schema. Let's call it polymer processing with tabular parser so they can easier distinguish it later, and then I should save it again. So this is live polymer processing and tabular parser. So this is successfully recognized by NOMAD, and I need to just create a new entry. Create from custom schema. And that was what we just created and uploaded. And now let's have a look. So we saw these 4 quantities already before. We had these 3 subsections before, right? And we inspected them. And now this is what we just added, which was a new subsection. I can open it again. This is the description of the data file. And now I can load the data file here directly, which was this p3ht optical.csv. So since we have already uploaded the file, it's asking if I want to overwrite the file. I say yes. And I should click on save. It takes a few seconds, and now again, that's what we have. So basically the wavelength quantity which is filled with the values from the CSV file. That was it. Thank you very much for your attention and time.